There are moments in history when silence says more than any shouted command, when the stillness after an event becomes its own kind of echo. Such moments are rarely planned. They arrive without warning, born from a collision of arrogance and quiet, disciplined strength. And though they last only seconds, they leave an imprint on every witness, shaping how a generation remembers what dignity and power truly look like. This is one of those moments. It began on an unremarkable afternoon inside Fort Hellman, a training base known not for comfort or glory, but for the relentless grind that shaped its soldiers. The mess hall, a cavern of clattering trays and overlapping conversations, was the one place where hierarchy was supposed to soften. Rank mattered less when everyone stood in line for the same lukewarm stew. And yet, even in places meant for rest, arrogance found ways to rise. Among the hundreds of trainees stationed there that season was a woman named Sergeant Mara Ellings, though most didn't know her name when the story began. She had arrived only 3 days earlier, quiet, unassuming, a uniform free of any marks that suggested authority or experience. The recruits saw her as one of their own, perhaps even less than that, a newcomer, someone who blended into the background, someone easy to underestimate. They did not know what she carried in her posture, the stillness of someone who did not need to announce what she had survived. The 4 men who would test her that day were known around the base for their swagger. Officially, they were just recruits, no different from anyone else. Unofficially, they had crafted their own hierarchy, feeding off each other's bravado. Led by a loud, broad-shouldered trainee named Rylan Kaur, they moved through Fort Hellman as though they were destined for greatness, and everyone else was simply set dressing for their rise. To them, Mara was invisible until she wasn't. It began with nothing more than a spilled drink. Someone bumped a tray. Someone murmured an apology. Mara stepped aside, quiet as always, and the moment should have ended there. But Rylan Kaur saw an opportunity, or what he thought was one. A small disturbance, a small target, a small woman standing alone with no one paying attention. He smiled at his friends, and they understood instantly. 4 recruits, 1 newcomer, no witnesses who would bother to intervene. They followed her between the rows of tables, blocking the aisle with casual confidence. Voices lowered. The edges of conversations thinned. Somewhere near the kitchen door, a loud clang echoed as a pot was dropped. But even that didn't shift the attention. The mess hall held its breath without knowing why. Mara stopped when she sensed them behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She said nothing. She simply set her tray down on a nearby table, as though placing the final piece of a ritual she had performed 1,000 times before. Rylan stepped closer. Too close. What's the rush, new girl? He asked, voice oiled with mock friendliness. You bumped into us earlier. Didn't even look back. That's not how things work here. His friends formed a semicircle around her, cutting off every exit. Mara lifted her eyes at last. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was only a quiet, measured presence, the kind that belongs to someone who does not respond to threats, because she has already assessed the outcome. A few nearby recruits glanced over, sensing tension but uncertain of the cause. No one intervened. No one spoke. The moment stretched thin. 42 seconds later, the entire room would fall silent. But in that first second, before history tipped, only one truth mattered. The 4 recruits had no idea who they had just cornered. There in the mess hall shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the room itself sensed a line being crossed. Conversations dimmed. Spoons hovered halfway to mouths. A few recruits leaned back in their chairs, watching with wary curiosity. Most didn't even know what they were waiting for. They only felt the tension threading itself through the room like a silent current. Rylan Kaur stepped forward until the tips of his boots nearly touched hers. He towered over Mara, confident in the height and muscle that had always served him well. His friends flanked him, forming a wall of bodies and bravado. Their smirks mirrored his. To them, this was sport, a demonstration of control, a reminder that the base had its own unofficial rules. And those rules were written by the loudest, strongest, almost reckless. Mara didn't move. She didn't step back, didn't raise her hands, didn't reach for anything that might suggest fear. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as though studying a problem far smaller than the one in front of her. Step aside, she said quietly. Not a plea, not a warning, simply a direction. Rylan chuckled. You're in no position to tell anyone here what to do. He leaned closer. You must be new, so let me teach you something useful. Mara's expression didn't change. Her breathing stayed steady, measured. She watched him not like a threat, but like a variable. You should walk away, she said. The second silence settled deeper. Denser, 2 tables away, a corporal paused mid-step. He sensed something but couldn't yet pinpoint what. This was the kind of tension that precedes sudden storms. Ryland's jaw twitched in irritation. He wasn't used to resistance, especially from someone he perceived as small, quiet, and alone. His ego searched for an audience, and the mess hall, half wary, half entertained, was giving him one. "Boys," he said without taking his eyes off Marat. "Looks like she needs a little lesson in respect." One of his friends snorted. "Yeah, let's help her understand the order of things." The 3 recruits tightened the circle, and Marat found herself close enough to feel their breath. To an untrained eye, she was cornered hopelessly so. But to those who understood posture, balance, or discipline, there was something off about the moment. Her stance wasn't that of someone trapped. It was that of someone waiting for permission from the situation itself, permission to end it. Ryland reached out, 2 fingers extended, aiming to flick the brim of her cap in a gesture meant to belittle her. He never touched it. Marat shifted not back, not sideways, but only enough for his finger to meet air. The movement was so fluid, so small, that most observers didn't register she had moved at all. Ryland frowned, irritated that his attempt at dominance had missed. He reached again, faster this time. Again, nothing but air. A few recruits blinked. One whispered, "What did she just?" Ryland's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second, just enough for annoyance to begin curdling into something closer to anger. His friends stopped smirking. The corporal, who had paused earlier, now took one slow step forward, sensing something out of the ordinary. "Don't play games," Ryland snapped. Marat finally spoke again. "I want you." You ignored it. Her voice was steady, the kind of tone soldiers heard from instructors who never needed to shout to be obeyed. Then, for the first time since the encounter began, Marat moved deliberately. She raised her chin, meeting the eyes of each recruit in front of her, one by one, memorizing their expressions, their assumptions, their complete lack of awareness. "Last chance," she said. The words didn't echo the hall was too quiet now, but they resonated in a way that promised consequences none of them could yet imagine. Ryland scoffed. "I don't think you understand who's in control, hey?" He didn't finish, not because Marat moved, but because the mess hall doors opened behind them and someone stepped inside. A figure who would later become a key witness to what happened next, and whose presence ensured that the next 42 seconds would enter Fort Hellman's unofficial history forever. The person who entered the mess hall was Captain Emery Vance, a man whose reputation at Fort Hellman carried a strange weight, not harsh, not lenient, but watchful. He was known for observing everything, intervening rarely, and remembering more than he ever admitted. His presence alone had a way of sharpening a room. When the doors opened and he stepped through, several recruits straightened instinctively. Others lowered their voices, but Ryland Core and his trio didn't turn. Their focus was still on Marat, a mistake that would follow them for years. Captain Vance paused near the entrance, scanning the hall with the instinct of someone who had seen too many confrontations ignite from nothing. His eyes narrowed slightly when he noticed the stalled circle of recruits. The mess hall was too quiet for lunchtime, too focused. Something was wrong. He took a slow step forward, but before he could close the distance, Ryland made his final, irreversible choice. "All right," Ryland growled, stepping toward Marat. "Lesson time," one of his friends muttered. "Just grab her arm and make her listen." Captain Vance's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. He had heard that. But Marat did not react with fear. Instead, she exhaled softly, a single measured breath, the kind taken by soldiers who had trained their bodies to move into action with precision rather than force. Ryland reached. Marat moved. What happened next unfolded so quickly that even the watching corporal didn't track every detail. All he understood was that one heartbeat the recruits seemed in control, and in the next, their balance and their certainty had been ripped out from under them. Marat pivoted on the ball of her foot, redirecting Ryland's reaching arm with a movement so controlled it looked almost gentle. But the effect was devastating. His posture collapsed forward, his weight thrown off, his momentum weaponized against him. He slammed into the table beside her with a sharp wooden crack. Gasps shot through the room. Ryland tried to regain footing, but Marat was already 2 steps ahead, redirecting, neutralizing, dismantling the attempted aggression with a fluid efficiency no ordinary recruit should have possessed. His nearest friend lunged. Marat's hand flashed once, a sharp, precise strike to his center of gravity, and he dropped to one knee, breath knocked out of him in a silent collapse. The remaining 2 recruits froze, hesitation cutting through their bravado. Their eyes darted from Marat to their fallen companions, uncertainty cracking their confidence. But pride is louder than reason, and pride pushed one more forward. He swung. A mistake. Marat sidestepped, redirected the strike, and executed a movement so fast that even Captain Vance's trained eyes widened. The recruit found himself pinned against the edge of a table, arm locked, breath caught, unable to move. By now, the entire hall had fallen into a stunned stillness. Rylan staggered back onto his feet, face flushed with humiliation and fury. He grabbed at the overturned chair beside him and lifted it as though intending to swing it. Marat didn't wait. A single pivot, a single motion, a single controlled maneuver. The chair slipped from Rylan's hands. He hit the ground with a thud that echoed like a dropped anchor. 40 seconds. That was all it took. By the time the final movement ended, the silence in the mess hall was absolute, a silence so deep it felt like a held breath across an entire unit. Captain Vance stood frozen 3 steps forward from where he had started. He had witnessed every moment, and now, for the first time in years, he was genuinely shocked. Not by the violence, it wasn't violence. Not by the speed, though it had been extraordinary. He was shocked because he recognized the movements. Movements he had not seen in a long time. Movements only taught to an elite few. Marat Ellings stood in the center of the mess hall, calm, unshaken, her posture steady as stone. Not a single recruit dared breathe too loudly, and only Captain Vance understood the truth that was beginning to dawn across the stunned faces around her. This woman was not a recruit, not a newcomer, not someone to be cornered. She was something else entirely. Something the 4 men would have known had they bothered to look closer. Her silence had become the room's silence, and the mess hall had just learned why. The silence that followed was unlike anything Fort Hellman had ever experienced inside its mess hall. It was not the silence of awe alone, nor the silence of fear. It was the silence that rises when an entire room realizes it has just witnessed something it was never meant to see, something that rewrites understandings, rearranges assumptions, and forces every observer to question their own certainty. Marat Ellings did not look triumphant. She did not look winded. She certainly did not look concerned. Instead, she simply breathed out once, steady and measured, as though she had just completed a familiar drill. The 4 recruits lay scattered around her, none seriously injured, but all utterly stripped of the arrogance they had carried in with them. Rylan groaned from the ground, trying to push himself upright. The confidence that had defined him only moments earlier had drained from his expression. Shock was replacing it, and beneath that shock, something else was forming. The dawning realization that he had never been in control at all. Before he could speak, Captain Emery Vance stepped forward. His boots echoed sharply against the floor, each step drawing every eye in the hall toward him. He stopped 2 paces from Marat, his expression unreadable. The recruits around them held their breath. They expected shouting, discipline, punishment, something official and immediate. Instead, Captain Vance spoke in a calm, low voice. Sergeant Ellings. A ripple went through the room. The title alone shattered the last remnants of confusion. Whispers erupted, hushed and frantic. Sergeant? She's not a recruit. How did we not know? Wait, Ellings. As in? Rylan's eyes widened. His friends looked sick. Marat inclined her head slightly. Captain Vance continued. I assume you had good reason not to announce your prior status upon arrival. I followed the processing instructions given, she replied. My assignment wasn't to be public knowledge yet. The mess hall stirred again, a rustle of shock and speculation. Captain Vance folded his hands behind his back. Understood. His gaze shifted to the 4 recruits on the ground. And them? Marat looked at them only briefly. They cornered me. They attempted to intimidate me. They reached for physical contact without consent. A slight pause. I redirected. Her explanation was simple, factual, unembellished, but Vance understood exactly what she meant, and more importantly, how she had done it. He turned his full attention to Rylan Core, who finally managed to stand, clutching the edge of a table for balance. His face was pale. Sweat dampened his brow. The humiliation settled on him like a heavy weight he couldn't shake off. Recruit Core, Captain Vance said, voice steady but cutting through the air like a knife. Do you have any idea who you just attempted to assault? Rylan swallowed hard. Sir, No, sir. No. Marat interjected softly. They didn't know. That's why I gave warning. The soft rebuke held more strength than a shout ever could. Captain Vance nodded once. Sergeant Ellings is not only a decorated operator. She has spent the last 8 years under Naval Special Warfare Command. The room didn't gasp this time. It was too stunned even for breath. Rylan's legs wobbled. His friends stood frozen, faces drained of all color. Marat's identity was no longer ambiguous, no longer a rumor. It was truth, delivered in front of the entire mess hall, and it carried weight heavy enough to crush pride in an instant. Then Captain Vance addressed the hall itself. "Let this stand as a lesson," he said, voice resonating with authority. "Power is not earned by intimidation. Strength is not proven through arrogance." And respect, he glanced at Marat, is owed to those who walk quietly, not those who shout the loudest. He turned back to the recruits responsible. "You will answer for your actions. But before the formal process begins, you will acknowledge what happened here, slowly, painfully." Rylan lowered his head. "I was wrong," he muttered. Louder, Vance commanded. Rylan swallowed. "I was wrong." One by one, the others echoed him. The hall remained silent, the lesson sinking deeper into the foundation of the room itself. And yet, Captain Vance knew the moment was not over. There was one more truth to reveal, one that would turn this incident into something larger than a disciplinary note. In the weeks that followed, Fort Hellman changed in ways no regulation could have enforced and no memo could have commanded. Change arrived quietly, echoing the presence of the woman who had unknowingly become its catalyst. Recruits stood straighter, conversation sharpened. The undercurrent of casual intimidation that had lived in shadowy corners of the base began to dissolve, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Arrogance was not strength, loudness was not leadership, and underestimating someone based on surface assumptions was a mistake that no one wished to repeat. Word of what happened in the mess hall spread beyond Fort Hellman with surprising speed. Soldiers traveling for joint exercises whispered the story at other bases, telling it in fragments, each recounting a little different from the last, but all circling the same undeniable truth. A quiet woman mistaken for a recruit had dismantled 4 arrogant trainees in 42 seconds. Some versions claimed it was 30 seconds. Others said a minute, but time mattered less than the impact. Soon, instructors from other branches arrived with curious questions. Officers from remote installations brought it up during briefings. Eventually, even retired veterans heard the tale and nodded knowingly, as if the event reaffirmed lessons they had learned long ago, that the most formidable warriors rarely carry themselves like conquerors. Marat Ellings did not bask in the attention. She remained consistent in her routines, training in silence, studying at dawn, maintaining the same composed discipline she had brought with her from naval special warfare. She answered questions only when necessary. She offered guidance only when asked, and she never referenced the confrontation, but others did. One evening, months later, Captain Vance found her outside the training grounds, sharpening a blade with meticulous care. The sun was setting behind her, casting a warm glow across the range. "You've become quite the legend," he said, stopping beside her. Marat did not look up. "Stories grow on their own. I don't feed them, that may be," Vance replied, "but legends often have a purpose. They remind people who they can be, and what they must avoid becoming." Marat paused her sharpening. "If they learn something from it, that's enough." Vance studied her quietly. "And what do you think they should learn?" She finally met his gaze. Her eyes were calm, not proud, not amused, but grounded in a deeper conviction. "That control is not weakness," she said. "That restraint is not surrender. And that the loudest people in a room are usually trying to convince themselves of their own strength." The captain smiled faintly, spoken like someone who has carried that truth through harsher places than this base. Marat resumed her work. "Harsh places teach clarity." He nodded, then turned to walk away, but paused after a few steps. "You know," he said over his shoulder, "the recruits still talk about what you did. They say the room went silent because they'd never seen anything like it." Marat's answer was almost a whisper. "The silence wasn't mine. It was theirs the moment they realized what arrogance costs." Captain Vance left her to the fading daylight, his steps slow, thoughtful. The legend of that day would grow even more over the following years. Soldiers deployed to distant assignments would mention it around fire pits. Trainees struggling through their first brutal weeks of conditioning would hear it from senior cadets. Even officers, during leadership seminars, would reference the Fort Hellman lesson, a moment when pride was dismantled not through punishment, but through poise. Long after Marat's transfer to another joint command, her name continued to circulate quietly among those who respected precision and discipline. Not as a warning, but as a standard, a reminder, a story told to the arrogant before they climbed too high, and to the humble before they doubted themselves too deeply. One particular line of hers survived in nearly every retelling, a final piece of wisdom so simple, so piercing, and so undeniably true that it became the unofficial motto of several training units. Strength isn't proven by overpowering others. It's proven by mastering yourself. And with those words, the legend of Marat Ellings, the quiet operator who silenced an entire room in 42 seconds, settled into the long, unspoken history of military fables. A reminder that arrogance collapses under its own weight, and dignity, carried in silence, endures. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories.